When we look at, let's take a year, let's say the year 200. And 200 is an interesting date because in the year 200, the Sanhedrin in Israel, that is the Supreme Court of the Jewish people in Israel, edited the final edition of the Mishnah. And the Mishnah is the constitution of the Jewish people. It is the basic law of the Jewish people. It incorporates all of Jewish law. Theoretically, the Mishnah is based on the Torah. The Jewish law is based on the 613 commandments in the Torah, first 5 books of the Torah. But the Torah is the basic law of Judaism. We lived by the Torah, but after the passage of several centuries, law changes caused by transformations in the economy, geographical considerations, and simply the development of life, and also the desire to solve a problem based on the law. And sometimes the problem is a simple one, and sometimes it's complex. So what they did in the case of the Mishnah was they gathered together the decisions of Jewish courts over many centuries and put them into organized fashion, into 6 major divisions and 63 subdivisions. And that is the Jewish legal system. It's in the Mishnah. But at the time that the Mishnah was completed, and I say it was the final edition because we know the Mishnah began to be put together around the year 120 by Rabbi Akiva, and then it was expanded under Rabbi Meir around the year 180, and finally put into its final form, which you know as a Mishnah. At that time, the Jewish community in Israel, in the land of Israel, was living under the Roman Empire. The Jewish community in Babylonia was under a Persian Empire. The Persian Empire was, you could say, benevolent, or even better, indifferent to the fact that Jews were there. They were not bothering the Jews at all. So the Jews were self-governing, autonomous community. They had total autonomy, which means you could say that the Jews were essentially an independent nation within the Persian Empire. The only restrictions being put upon them is that they won't have their own foreign policy and they won't have an army of their own. But other than that, they were free to live according to Jewish law. The conditions of the Persian Empire shortly after the Babylonian exile, that is, when Jews were taken from Jerusalem, brought to Babylon as captives, and then the Babylonians ignored them, which was fine for the Jews, and then the Persian Empire that conquered the Babylonians actually favored the Jews and encouraged them. So the Jews of Babylonia grew into a very large and self-governing community that felt completely free. The Jews of the land of Israel were living in the Roman Empire, which was becoming Christian. And so the Jews of Babylonia said to the Jews of Israel, you know, we should have our own legal institutions and make our own decisions because you're living in an environment which is growing hostile to Judaism. They were right, because in the year 325, Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire, and Christianity was very hostile to Judaism. So the Jews of Babylonia said, in effect, let's do our own thing. And so on the basis of the Mishnah, which is the basic Jewish constitution, there arose 2 separate legal developments, one of which we call the Babylonian Talmud, and the other is the Jerusalem or the Palestinian Talmud. Now, the Babylonian Talmud includes the Mishnah and the developments of Jewish law in Babylonia over the course of the next 300 years. The Palestinian Talmud includes the same Mishnah, but developments in the Jewish courts of the Roman Empire, of the land of Israel, over the next 225 years. So it's the same Mishnah with the addition of the thing they call the Gemara, which constitutes the Babylonian Talmud and the Palestinian Talmud. In many ways, they agree. They're not sharp disagreements among them, but there are different developments. Not only that, you have a different attitude, a different expression. Babylonian Talmud, evidently, you see total freedom of expression. Palestinian Talmud, you see restraint, restrictions, and some things they never discussed in the Palestinian courts because the church wouldn't let them. So they said, you can't do this. So one section of the Mishnah, which is expanded in the Babylonian Talmud, doesn't even exist in the Palestinian Talmud because the censors, the Christian censors, said you can't do that. And that was a section pertaining to the temple, because the church said the temple will never be rebuilt, so don't even talk about it. That's interesting. In the course of time, the Palestinian, and by the way, talk about the Palestinian Talmud and the Jewish community in the land of Israel, that was the law of the Jews of the Roman Empire. So the Palestinian Talmud refers to the land of Israel, Egypt, Sicily, Italy, and then Germany and Spain and France, because that was all one empire, the Roman Empire, and this is how the influences went. And in the Palestinian Talmud, we also have references to the fact that the authorities of the Jewish community in Israel would send delegates to Rome to encourage the Jewish community, to improve their educational system, and so on. There was constant contact. Now, the Jews of Israel, Hebrew, their language, their dialect, their pronunciation, is what developed what we call eventually Ashkenazic Hebrew and Ashkenazic Jewish civilization. The Jews of Babylonia, after the Arab-Muslim conquests, which spread Islamic Arabic civilization from Babylonia all the way across North Africa and into Spain, that became one cultural complex, and the intellectual and cultural atmosphere there was reinforced from Babylonia to Spain. And the language spoken by the Jews of Babylonia is what we call Sephardic Hebrew. But there were also differences in attitude and in modes of expression and so on.